Welcome to ESG in Practice, where we turn environmental, social, and governance topics into practical, actionable steps.
I'm Anne, your guide to data-driven sustainability insights.
And I'm Abby, with 2 decades of hands-on experience in this field.
Together with our guests, we're unraveling the complexities of ESG, where we move the discussion away from glossary reporting
to make sustainability and compliance a real competitive advantage for your business.
Our guest for today is Anna Romberg. She is the Executive Vice President of Sustainability, Legal and Compliance at Getinge, and she's also one of the co-founders of Nordic Business Ethics.
Really excited to have Anna join the podcast today. She's well known in the Nordic ethics and compliance circles based on the work that she's done co-founding Nordic Business Ethics Initiative. The mission of the organization is to promote responsible corporate conduct, business integrity, and responsible leadership. And it's a great place for people who are interested in the governance topic to go and learn more.
Hello, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our podcast, ESG in Practice. Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me on this podcast, Abby. And it's super interesting to be here. I think you touch on really relevant topics. My background, I don't know how far back you want me to go, but if I go from where I stand today, I am an executive vice president at a Swedish medtech company operating on a global scale. I have responsibility for the global sustainability, legal and ethics and compliance functions in the group. Also established a network called the Nordic Business Ethics Initiative. I'm really passionate about driving responsible business practices. I've done a PhD in the field of corporate governance and compliance. And one of my first PhD conferences I was at, it was 2010 or 2011, the UN Principles for Responsible Investment Conference in Toronto, where the debate was hot around ESG. And now almost 15 years later, it's super interesting to see how it's really become mainstream. But I've been following the ESG debate for many, many years.
Really interesting and relevant career, Anna. You started Nordic Business Ethics. You already have a really busy schedule, a lot of responsibilities, but what sparked you to create this organization?
It's really about my passion to drive fact-based discussions. Back in 2017, 2018, we were discussing about lack of fact-based discussions when it comes to business ethics, in particular in Nordic companies. When we interacted with boards and senior management, we pretty frequently heard that it's just common sense. We are ethical companies. Yes, there are the scandals like the Statoil scandal many years ago, and then we've had the Telia scandal and Ericsson scandal, but that's isolated events. It's not our company. We are a good company. We have good values. We have good people. Ethics is not an issue. We felt that's not the reality that we see when working with big multinationals. So we wanted to have facts and have the employee perspective more visual. And then we decided, hey, let's do a survey on employees' perceptions of ethics at their workplaces. That's how it started. We did this survey. We got some amazing partners. So we were actually able to get a very robust data set for this. And then we launched the survey. There was a huge crowd signing up to our events, to the launch events. That was pre-pandemic. We had physical events in Helsinki, Stockholm, and Oslo. And we had some 120 people joining per site. And we felt like, wow, there is a really big interest in this. So what do we do with all of these great colleagues in the field who have this interest? And then we just decided, well, we should probably create some form of a network to keep the dialogue going. And that's really how it started. We wanted to drive fact-based discussions, and then we've added on to be a platform for honest discussions and also for empowering each other to drive the change that is needed in our companies.
That is great to hear, Anna. And it really impresses me that you have moved towards a very fact and data-focused discussion around ESG and compliance. My question is, when you first started this survey, what was some interesting facts that were maybe unexpected or that stood out to you more?
There is so much rich data in the survey, and we feel with Nina many times that we're only scratching the surface. You know that better than anyone, how much work it is to actually analyze data. We have 2 surveys. If I quickly comment upon the employee survey, what struck us first was the level of perceived misconduct in Nordic organizations. The majority of employees has witnessed something during the last 12 months. It is very prevalent. And also what surprised us in the first survey was the lack of a speak-up culture, that we do not seem to be comfortable raising concerns. However, when we repeated the survey 2022, we could see that had improved. In that employee perception survey, we saw that younger generations that have been in the workplace for a shorter period of time are more inclined to witness unethical conduct and also more inclined to raise concerns. We are wondering if we see a trend shift here. The younger generation is pushing us to really address issues that we perhaps have normalized previously.
And I'm curious, when talking about the most recent survey on the current state of governance and compliance, which was actually aimed directly at chief ethics and compliance officers, what was the most interesting finding there?
All of us know what a basic compliance framework looks like, with risk assessments, policies, trainings, doing your due diligence and investigations and so on. We know that framework. We're pretty good at implementing those formal elements, but now it's all about the effectiveness. All the efforts we put into this, does it make sense? And that's really the key question, I would say, that comes out from this survey.
Anna, I've been following Nordic Business Ethics. I'm very aware of the survey, which is really popular in the Nordics. I want to dive deeper into the ethics and compliance effectiveness that you just mentioned, because there are some interesting points that came out of it. The top 3 challenges for ethics and compliance teams. Over 50% of respondents saying it. The actual impact on culture and business practices, manual processes and lack of system support, and limited budgets and resources. Can we dive a little bit more into your thoughts on that?
This is one of my favorite topics, not only when I'm speaking, but also talking to our internal team at Getinge. How do we make sure that with the resources that we have, with the systems that we do have, still get an understanding for if what we do makes sense? I think it's a bit simplistic to think that if we just had more resources or we had better systems, then we would really know. The difficult thing, Abby, when we talk about effectiveness is that I don't think we have really decided what it looks like. What kind of data are we looking for? So it doesn't matter if we pour resources at it or implement a system if we haven't analyzed and tried to understand, okay, what is the impact that we are striving for? The transformation of compliance that I'm seeing is that we move on from doing the formalities, but now actually looking at the impact, which is hard. How do you measure that? That is the $1 million question that we as a profession now are grappling with, not only because we are coming full circle with the formal programs, but also because our boards and management teams are asking for that. The compliance profession is becoming more professionalized, and then we need to be able to measure and report and have metrics and show that the impact is there. That's really what's coming out from the survey. They are, of course, connected with resources and tools, but I think first of all, we have to decide, what does it look like? What data are we looking for? I don't know if that makes it even more confusing, but I think it's a really, really big question, and there are no simple answers.
No, I don't think there are simple answers, but I think it is a maturity journey, as you say. Having worked in this industry for a long time, there's the automatic training, whistleblowing channels, policy updates that have been going on for many years. But at one point, how do those work? Just because you have a policy, are people reading it? Are people putting it in use? That's the maturity, that journey that you see. And you also see this in other industries that are being more data-driven in their decision-making. And I think it's now coming to the point where compliance officers, people working within ESG and the governance side, need to better understand what they're doing. Is it being effective? This is the challenge. How do you actually measure conflict of interest effectiveness? How do you measure anti-bribery and corruption? Is it working? And these are the challenges that companies are facing. And with the regulations that are coming in, there's more consistency in what topics you should cover. But how do you measure it? We see this also with our customers, but I do think it's coming. People are starting to ask the questions. And I think that's why I was so excited to see your survey results, because it really quantified something that I felt in the industry was a challenge. And now you see over 100 compliance officers, governance officers feeling the same challenge that they have in understanding how do you make this more effective and improve this so that you can maybe get more resources later on to do what you need to do. That's the shift in our industry.
In a previous conversation, Anna, you had mentioned something about the DOJ, the U.S. Department of Justice.
If we go back to the famous 3 questions from the DOJ, is the program well designed? Is it applied in good faith? Does it work? The questions for many, many years, it's been there. From the authorities' side, they are starting to put an emphasis on this. When 5 years ago, you could go into the DOJ and talk a lot about the formal elements of your compliance program. And that's also what monitorships focused on, putting the procedures and controls and processes in place, which is needed. But now from the guidances that has come out during the recent years, there is really a big focus on culture, the impact, and making sure you can track that somehow. The authorities see it as well. You can have all the formal elements in place, but it doesn't mean that it's working. I'm a bit challenged when we have this discussion about measuring the effectiveness, because then some may say it should be zero misconduct. You shouldn't have any issues. And I'm wondering, is that really what we are striving for? Yes, in a perfect world. But I think when we all look outside the window, we see the world is not perfect. Then we need to relate to the context we are in. But of course, we should aspire for reduced misconduct. It's also about the element of speaking up, raising concerns, recognizing that good people make bad decisions. I would say that's a really fat red flag. If you don't have any whistleblowing reports and you don't have any misconduct in an organization, it's not realistic.
I remember this in a board. I was presenting our whistleblowing numbers, and one of the board members saying, "Oh, that's so disappointing that we have so many and they're increasing." And I actually said, no, this is a good thing, because it shows that there is a good culture, because you don't want a culture where nobody wants to say anything. Bad things will happen, but it's how do you mitigate the risk? How do you address them afterwards?
On the Business Ethics Survey, the question, which are the biggest challenges for the ethics and compliance team? The highest scoring one, around 58%, responded was manual processes and lack of system support. I would like to know, how did you address such an issue in your work?
I wouldn't say it's addressed, but we are working with it. I don't want to generalize here, but I've been working with many Nordic global companies, either in-house or then as a consultant. There is a common thread, which is the decentralized operations. Maybe not the same system support, or it's not a global blueprint that you just have in place in every subsidiary. It seems to be a bit of a common theme. I sometimes say to peers that work, for example, US companies, you have a plug and play system. You just have that basic platform. You just plug it in, and that's how it is. And it's much easier with the system supports and tools. Colleagues working in US companies would say, well, it's not really that either. So I think it's a shared challenge. The company that I work for today, we have grown quite a lot during the last years through acquisitions. If we look back how the Getinge group was formed, it's a lot of acquisitions. And then the challenge is, how do you integrate? And now we are trying to implement common processes and tools where it makes sense. We are also such a business that full decentralization doesn't make sense. How I, in practice, try to deal with it is, first of all, look at the risk. There is no self-interest in having a tool or system for something that's low risk or for something that won't drive decision-making or behaviors. So I try to understand, okay, what are the transactional elements, scenarios in our business where we actually really would benefit from some kind of system support and not having manual processes. It's a really sensitive balance there. Processes where we need to have systems and harmonization to be able to control that high risk element. There is no self-interest to say, yeah, a tool and a process will solve everything, but you need to make sure it solves your biggest challenges and biggest risks. You can have a system, or then you can have 50 compliance officers doing the same, but usually it's more efficient to put a system in place for that.
In the past, you had these large corporations that just top down and they go forward. But what you see in the industry now is growth through acquisitions. You have so many disparate systems that it's not easy to do top down, and you have little kingdoms, different leadership and management styles within each of these countries. How do you bring this all together without demanding it? You have to do it. The challenge is there are a lot of tools that you can use that are in the industry, but they might have been made for another process or a top-down organization. So it's very hard for compliance officers to find the right system or tool to be able to manage these decentralized processes, decentralized business units, and and disaggregated data that's around the organization. It's an interesting challenge that we're seeing more and more because of the focus on data and analytics. And you hear about AI all the time. Then there's a question within our field. How do we use this to help? We have an issue. How do we figure it out? Nobody's figured it out yet, but they're trying, and they're trying to put some framework around this.
I agree, because data analytics is all dependent on the raw data, the underlying data, rubbish in, rubbish out. So we need to make sure we have the data points and we are consistent with our definitions throughout the organizations. One example that I have from my current role, when we implemented such a simple thing as a contract management system, we had a bottom-up approach. One way of doing it is that you have the legal team and you have the compliance team just pushing it out. As you say, you have this little kingdoms, you have different way of operating. Some will just not use it. And so how do you do that? We liaised with our global sales organization and said, okay, let's target this part of our business because we know our distributor contracts, our reselling contracts, they are critical for us. So we start there. And the solution owner was global sales. But I had a person in my team who is head of our global legal projects. She was really the catalyst, but we were super clear that this is a system and a process that's owned by our sales organization. We had stakeholders like regional presidents, country presidents who were driving the implementation. I have a really good colleague, our chief commercial officer. He was great. He really emphasized the use of the tool. That enabled us to, first of all, we could agree on the data points. What do we need? For example, it's critical for us to know just a simple thing as the outcome from the due diligence. Was this low, medium, high risk? That is really critical data for us to have. Then the mitigation actions. Are there some conditions for the approval? That's critical data because we need to follow up on that one as well. And then there may be some points relating to auditing or continuous monitoring. We need to make sure that is happening. We could define critical data point for us, but then it was the global sales organization who sort of implemented it with our requirements. That's a good way of securing that it's not top down, but it needs to be bottom up as well.
I love that. And I think this is a really good tip for compliance officers or companies that don't have a lot of resources. You can't cover everything, so find the biggest risk. The second one I see is that top-down approach. I had the same challenge when I first started my career. I sat in an organization of a very top-down company. So I felt like I tell them what to do and they execute. That's fine. But then I went into an organization where I was the subsidiary compliance manager, a really large company. And suddenly I saw it from the side of the subsidiary and all of the things that the headquarters throws at the subsidiary and trying to manage that. In the headquarters, you're one person who cares about this one policy and process full time. In the subsidiary, you have millions of headquarter people trying to land things. And I love how you said, work with the subsidiary to get their buy-in. So they're driving the process. So it's useful for them. You should say, what is useful for the subsidiary? Because if you get the subsidiary to buy in and work on it, you'll naturally get the byproduct that you want. I really didn't understand myself until I was in a subsidiary compliance position and saw the challenges within the organization.
And I think it's helpful to have those experiences. Many times say it's quote unquote easy to sit in the head office and just put out requirements and say, okay, you need to do this. But the requirements are landing from so many different functions and processes. It can be one general manager and perhaps a finance person and then the sales people, and that's it. That ties to the effectiveness discussion, to dare to challenge ourselves. Otherwise, it's just going to be superficial implementation. The subsidiary is just going to tick the box and say it's done because they know if they are not ticking the box, they're going to get questions. But the data, it's not complete. They haven't really understood the purpose and so on. That's one part of effectiveness, to switch, see it at a subsidiary level and say, okay, how does really land here?
I see that in the industry. Sometimes maybe in the headquarters, they'll make a policy that is just beautiful and utopia. But when you try to implement it, it's just not possible with the resourcing and the timeline in the subsidiary. Would it actually be more effective if you took the risk instead of saying, I'm going to mitigate 100% of the risk within this policy? I'll mitigate 50% of the risk, but I'm going to most likely get 100% of the implementation of those risks. That's a challenge that some headquarters can think about. How do you actually simplify what you're doing? You might need to take more risk in doing that, but it will land in an organization and in doing so, mitigate the risk that you've had. It feels risky for the policy owner, but at the same time, we care about effectiveness and implementation.
I love that challenge because I see those 10 pages of policy documents that are more written by lawyers for lawyers. Not only that it's not possible, but you don't even understand. Then you have a practical situation and you're like, okay, but how in practice am I supposed to apply this kind of language? Taking it back to our risk assessments as well, to really say, okay, which are the key risks that we need to mitigate? And is it super clear? That is these 3 points. There can't be ambiguity around these points. The rest, sometimes you want to have that nice reference policy where everything is there, but maybe you should have a cover sheet that's super simple, really at a glance, make sure that this is not misunderstood.
Anna, about the raw data, you said rubbish in, rubbish out. And I think that is something that is not emphasized enough because in my opinion, if you have a lot of raw data that is not of good quality, very often that is scary to look into because the outcomes are probably going to be unexpected or messy or just a waste of time because you're not going to get any results. But I think what is necessary in the compliance industry is that you look at the raw data and then you start setting KPIs. Okay, how can we improve the data quality? That is the first step to creating some data-centric model. What surprises me from your survey is that a lot of people responded that there's a lack of system support, which I would understand, as you mentioned earlier, in the case of a decentralized system. But at the same time, around 84% of the responses were that there's a centralized governance model in their company. My question is, why do you think it is difficult to adopt a system when you have a centralized governance model?
One explanation could be that we have centralized compliance team. There's been a shift from having these compliance liaisons and dotted lines and so on to have a core team of ethics and compliance officers who report solid line into the chief ethics and compliance officer. That's the model that's becoming prevalent. That's what's meant with the centralized governance around compliance. However, this team is operating in a pretty decentralized organization. I do not think the rest of the company is centralized in the same way. It's pretty common to have quite independent business divisions, business areas, functional areas. The challenge is you don't have one counterparty to talk to, but maybe you have 10. You should implement a central risk-based approach in an otherwise decentralized organization or partly decentralized.
Yeah, I see the same thing in the industry. There is a lot of data that's sitting in the organization already. The challenge is peers like me, we come from a business or a legal background and we don't have the technical skills to be able to grab the data and understand that. A shift needs to happen within our own industry to understand, okay, maybe we don't have the right resources. Maybe hiring another SME with the same background as me is not the right way to go if we want to create a data-centric model. We need to work with people who are good with data, whether that's your internal IT team or you have a data team within your own organization or looking for data scientists outside of the organization to help support that. Two things that I see. One, there's a lot of data sitting within the organization that they don't know how to harness. Maybe it's sitting within their whistleblowing hotline, conflict of interest, other systems that they might have already, third-party risk management. They don't know how to take that data and look at it in different ways. The other one is what are the new KPIs that need to happen? What are the new data sources that they need to start collecting now that don't exist from before, that they need to start collecting in a system so that they can do data analytics later on? This is where we are right now in the sector, trying to figure out this aspect of it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Anna.
I fully agree with your point that the data is there. It's just about deciding what do we want the data to tell us. So if you say like the conflict of interest disclosures, the data is there. But is it interesting to just know the amount of disclosures? Probably not. Well, what are the correlations you want to look for? So I do think there, as you're alluding to, you need to have skills within the team to be innovative in combining data sets. If you see the conflict of interest disclosures in the purchasing organization relating to suppliers, or maybe within the sales organization relating to service contractors, then you're starting to look at the data in a little bit of a different way. I think as an industry, we have been a bit simplistic. We look at completion of training. How many have read our policies? Due diligence reports completed? Parties subject to sanction screenings? I mean, it's very much activity driven. It's pretty natural if we think about how we have evolved as a profession. We sort of want to show our stakeholders, our management and boards that we're super busy. We do a lot. During a period that was fine. It's like, oh, great. You're training everybody and you're just screening all our business partners. You're implementing the hotline in whistleblowing line in different countries. Great. But we're over that. We cannot continue just having these activity-based data points, but need now to start looking at the data in a different way. And that's that's a challenge. We're not trained to do that. As ethics and compliance professionals or lawyers, we don't necessarily have that background. We need to bring in that competence and thought leadership to help us evolve.
Anna, your ethics and compliance survey is one of the most, if not the most, data-driven initiative I've seen in the Nordics towards compliance. That makes me really happy because very often it's kind of lonely working in compliance where you're the only person that is handling the data. It's a bit of a misconception that you don't need a data person in compliance. There's people that don't have a medical degree but are contributing to cancer research just because they know how to handle data, because everything can be broken down. My question is, I've noticed that in the world of compliance, people are very keen to hire a new resource, a subject matter expert, instead of hiring someone to handle the data. This is a question for you, Abby, maybe as well. Is that because they're more focused on solving a short-term risk rather than contributing to a long-term project where you have data included as core part of the compliance team?
Maybe there is a feeling that we still have so much to do. There are all these gaps. The processes aren't perfect. We don't have the system support. The data is not super reliable. If we get in a data analyst, then we're going to get flooded because we are going to see our gaps. So there can be part of that where we feel we're not mature enough to still evolve to this stage, where it's actually really the wrong argument, because to be able to evolve and to make sure the work is truly risk-based, data analysis is key. But there may be something of just being afraid of really what would that tell us. I don't know, Abby, if that resonates with you.
People are unsure what to do with the data analytics. They know it's important, but they don't know how to work with it. I think there is maybe a maturity aspect of the industry that it's not there. Everyone knows we need to get a compliance officer, so they hire a compliance officer. Not understanding having one compliance officer with a limited budget by themselves might not be the most effective way to have the oversight that they need in the organization. People are starting to question that, and I do see that. I do see some ESG analysts that are being hired, data analysts that are coming, especially with the regulations that are coming in. But I do think within the compliance field, it's a maturity journey and people are just starting to question, is this the right way to go? I'm not saying don't hire a compliance officer. I'm saying hire a compliance officer with the resources or the platform to be able to manage and go deeper than the typical training and the typical policy making. And then they go deeper into the risk that they identify within the organization, making them more effective with their time because there's so much limited time that a compliance officer has anyway.
I do think this ESG trend, obviously driven by regulation as well, I mean, it's really putting an emphasis on this. So a shared data analyst, like an ESG analyst, as you're saying, that's able to harness data on the environmental side, social side within the compliance program. That's probably something that we will see coming up in many organizations.
I do see a convergence between ESG coming in because there's so many data points across the organization. The next challenge is, okay, now you found all of these different data points. How do you have a good oversight across these different data points? If you don't, then you're going to really bombard the subsidiary with so many different follow-ups. It's going to be really interesting to see the development of this sector.
With that being said, is there a particular situation or scenario where you saw technology contributed positively in your day-to-day work?
The tool that we do have in most compliance organizations is the whistleblower reporting system. It's super helpful. The data that you get out from that system is gem. The trend types of reports, are they anonymous? Which markets are maybe more anonymous reports? I think that may tell something about the culture that you are not comfortable of raising an issue with your name. Looking at how many reports that come in through the reporting system versus directly to ethics and compliance. I mean, if we wouldn't have that, I don't know how I would have driven the compliance work that I have done in the last 10 years. I've used that data so much to also emphasize various points. That's where we should start. And I think many of us are getting more proficient in using that.
That people are thinking, oh, we need a lot of new tools. You have some existing tools that you could dive deeper into the data. The whistleblowing is one, and it's not just number of whistleblowing. It's where is it coming from? How long does it take to close investigation? And even the training data, I think there's a lot of people, it's like 100% completion of training. If you deep dive into the training data, which I've done in the past, you could actually see some people completed the training in 2 minutes. Did they absorb anything in that training that should have been 30 minutes in 2 minutes? Do you need to go back to them and say, hey, look at this again? And you can see the effectiveness if you deep dive one level down from just 100% completion. taking the existing data that we have and just diving one level deeper will give you some insight that you can have.
But Abby, maybe they had superhuman reading skills.
It could be that one. And then you take them out of the risk process. That's the whole point about data, because data just gives you information so that you can deep dive. What we've seen with our customers is once they see the data, they're like, "Ooh, I want to find out more." And then they want to deep dive more and they want to deep dive more. But that's the exciting part of it, because you can once you start having the data.
With my team, we talk a lot about the so what. And when we have data, I'm questioning, what's the purpose? Is this just for information? It can be good. Or is it to drive some kind of decision making or change the behaviors? I would prefer that the data points are more to actually drive decision making and action. There is the tendency maybe for somebody in the ethics and compliance team to really want to dive into that. But then at the end of the day, you're like, this is still giving me information. I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to make a decision. That's where we should make sure we focus the data efforts on things that actually will drive a change.
I love that. Yeah. One is just reporting to report, but two, why are you even looking into this data? With risk mitigation to ensure that you have oversight and to really look into that second part of it, of what you're saying. Okay, let's go to the quick fire rapid questions.
Are you ready for some fire questions, Anna?
Always, always.
One word to describe the future of ESG.
Overwhelming.
Biggest misconception about ESG?
It's something optional because it's actually an integral part of any business.
Your go-to metric for ESG success.
The success part is that you have decided, what does it look like for us? I can't give you one, but at least as a company, you need to have defined and broken down ESG into your reality.
Biggest challenge in ESG implementation?
It really combines such wide topics and a variety of disciplines, and it's huge. It's a bit like we talk about finance. And then we assume everybody understands, oh, now we're actually talking about obsolete inventory in our stock.
Most underrated aspect of ESG.
I don't know if it's underrated, but maybe a misconception that it would not be linked to growth and profitability. Ethics and compliance for me is really about driving informed and responsible decision making.
Why is ESG implementation more important than ESG reporting?
If you don't produce goods or sell your goods or services, you don't have anything to report on from a financial aspect. And the same thing with ESG. Like if you don't do anything, what will you report on? Historically, we've been able to rely on storytelling, ambitions, and telling who we want to be and that we respect things and the environment and people are important for us, but not really having to show what we do. That's the good thing with the regulation that's forcing us to focus on the doing part.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Anna. Do you have any questions for us?
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I think we're running out of time here. But I'm, super intrigued to continue the discussion and just following the work that you're doing. So thank you for having me.
I'm very happy. Just want to say that we focus so much on the data aspect of this industry. I'd love to see whatever you guys are going to do on the next survey. I'm following you closely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our listeners for your support so far. If you like this episode, we will highly appreciate you rating it 5 stars to help increase the reach of ESG in practice.
And if you want to be notified when our next episode drops, please hit the follow button on our screen.